Lawyers for the 5 co-defendants in the Governor Whitmer kidnapping case filed a major 20-page motion to dismiss the entire case, and they did it on Christmas Day. We're going to go through the entire motion and piece together exactly what's happening here, but let's make sure we're familiar with the co-defendants themselves. We can see them here. Remember, we started with 6 in this case. Ty Garbin is no longer on the screen. He took a plea deal. He's going to be working with the government, and we're left with these 5 co-defendants. Of course, we've got Fox, Franks, Brandon, Caserta, Harris, and Croft. These are the gentlemen who are sort of bunched together. Their case is scheduled for a jury trial March 8th, 2022. And so they are filing this motion to dismiss because they are upset with some of the officers, some of the FBI agents who were involved in the investigation. Of course, we're talking about these 3 gentlemen. We've spoken about them before on the show. This is Special Agent Impala. We've got Special Agent Trask. He was somebody who was let go from the FBI, actually has a domestic assault case against his wife. And then we have Special Agent Chambers. We spent some time talking about him and his company that we'll detail a little bit further. So as I mentioned, we have this motion. This is the motion to dismiss coming forward by the attorneys for the 5 co-defendants, the 5 gentlemen here. And the thing that is so fun about this is this was filed on 12/25. Of course, that's Christmas Day, filed on that day and signed off on by all the different attorneys here as part of this case. Scott Graham, we've got Christopher Gibbons, he's representing Fox, Joshua Blanchard for Croft, Julia Kelly for Harris, Michael Hills for Caserta, and then Scott Graham, of course, is representing Franks. And they all signed off on this puppy December 25th, Christmas Day, just dropping this big whopper right in the lap of prosecutors. This is a motion to dismiss, and it's alleging that the government was involved in serious misconduct. And so it's quite a present to drop down the Christmas, down the chimney is what I was thinking of. And so here is the motion to dismiss the superseding indictment. So superseding indictment means that this was the actual filing of the charges, or they want to dismiss this. The most recent set of charges, they're asking for a dismissal, and they're saying that this needs to be done on the basis of government overreach and misconduct. And we've been talking a lot about this in the Whitmer plot for a long time. So let's go through this. I'm going to try to cut through a lot of the legalese, but this is a juicy motion, so we'll spend some time on it. The defendants in this manner, through their attorneys, they move the court to dismiss the charges against them. In support of this motion, we have the following memorandum. Here, essentially what we're saying is the evidence demonstrates an egregious overreach by government agents and by the informants that those agents handled. So not only the FBI agents, but the confidential human sources, the confidential informants that the FBI was working with, they were manipulating them. The key to the government's plan, they say, was to turn general discontent with Governor Whitmer's COVID policies into crimes that could then be prosecuted. Defense attorneys here say the government picked what they knew would be a sensational charge, a conspiracy to kidnap the governor, when the government was faced with evidence showing the defendants had no interest in a kidnapping plot. It refused to accept its failure, and it continued to push its plan. Eventually, the government initiated this case, despite the fact that it knew that there was no plan to kidnap, no operational plan, and no details about how a kidnapping would occur or what would happen afterward. They say there was no conspiracy. In fact, they say there was no misconduct at all. The defendants were constantly repudiating what the government wanted them to do, and really what this comes down to is entrapment as a matter of law. In other words, the government entrapped them. The government caused all of this to happen, and the defendants are innocent. And because the government overstepped, it's now appropriate for the court to dismiss the entire case. All of the charges brought forward, the government's misconduct is so bad that it warrants just dropping all of the charges. So they explain how and why this is entrapment. They say, look, regarding the initial suggestion of wrongdoing, and there was an expression of reluctance, back on July 7, 2020, multiple defendants and others were together when someone apparently raised the subject of kidnapping, and someone in the group immediately said, quote, "Not cool with offensive kidnapping." Okay, way back on July 7th, somebody said that. Others, including defendants Frake and Harris, echoed that sentiment. So back when all this was bubbling up, nobody was cool with it. Incident shows that there was no predisposition to kidnap the governor, Governor Whitmer, or anybody else. Fast forward to July 18th. There was a, quote, national militia meeting that was held by the government. In this instance, they're talking about the FBI and the U.S. government hosting these meetings, not another organization, sort of this fake militia group. that the government is creating. When they were at that event, Ty Garbin rebuffed a confidential human source's suggestion about kidnapping a public official. Garbin said, "So I think an objective to go for is not the kidnapping, right? I don't think that's a good idea." They're referencing a motion to admit statements where that language is held. 3 weeks later, we go forward to August 9th. Defendant Daniel Harris, this gentleman over here on the left, he told the lead confidential human source and others, says, quote, "No snatch and grab, I swear to effing God. Okay, we're not going to do that." And he's being charged with being a part of this conspiracy, even though he said back then on August 9th, no snatch and grab. Ty Garbin back then seconded his repudiation, withdrawing from the conspiracy, said kidnapping is just as bad as going into the Capitol. In other words, I don't want to do it. So you've got Garbin, who is not here. Garbin already took a plea deal. Franks and Harris and several people repudiating the government's attempts to go out there and engage in the kidnapping. This motion continues. You see on the left, this is Special Agent FBI Impala. He testified back during August 9th. He confirmed that all the defendants reacted negatively to the idea of kidnapping. Somebody asks a question to Impala. Can we call it that, all right? And what's the reaction of the group when Adam Fox talked about this idea being the kidnapping? Impala, during this line of questioning, says, well, there was a negative reaction. People were surprised. They didn't take to it kindly. There were a lot of questions being asked about it. Kind of seemed like it was over the top. This was back during a prior probable cause hearing. After that meeting, later on in the evening, Special Agent Chambers, who we're going to see next, and Impala, they participated in a phone call. They called confidential human source Dan and Adam Fox. Okay, so now you have three people who are on the side of the government versus Adam Fox. You've got this FBI agent Impala, you've got Special Agent Chambers, who's not on the screen, and confidential human source Dan, all calling Adam Fox. Dan says, what do you think about everybody where they're at? Like what do you think about this kidnapping idea? Fox says, definitely divided. Dan says, like your plan and all? He says, I mean, we're divided. Like, this is not something that we want to do. We're having doubts and conversations about this. This continues. Defense motion says that these people had no desire whatsoever to kidnap anyone. Yet the government wouldn't drop the idea. Confidential human sources, they continue to broach plans despite official government admonitions barring the suggestion of such plans. The government's not supposed to make these suggestions like kidnapping and killing the governor, but they did. Phone calls like the one above represent a mere appetizer. Confidential human sources handlers, aka the FBI agents, pulled the puppet strings the entire time. On August 28th, confidential human source Dan asks Special Agent Chambers, who's over here. Dan is represented by this anonymous photograph. He is not an official government agent, but Chambers is, and so they're having a conversation. Dan asks Chambers, would you want 2 trips or wait till we get more guys? This was part of his attempts to, quote, get it right for the government. Chambers wants him to do things, and Dan wants to make sure he gets it right. In state court, then we have Special Agent Impala. He affirmed his direct role in telling confidential human sources what to say to people. Impala then is educating Dan through the assistance of Chambers to have conversations with Fox and others. He told the CHS what to say to Adam Fox. He was communicating with the confidential human source during the confidential human source's conversation with Fox. So in other words, it was almost as if Fox was actually directly communicating with Impala because he was there and guiding the conversations. And Impala then is suggesting that Fox come train at Joe Morrison's property, and he was urging Fox to do so. So you have this very, very close connection between these two. We also have Special Agent Chambers. Now, we've talked about Chambers previously on this channel. Given Chambers' role in directing activities here, also sort of coordinating this whole thing, he, in a company, tweeted about the investigation. We explored that in an earlier video. The defense explored it as well. Special Agent Chambers dissolved the company, ex-Intel, filed papers with the Secretary of State out of New Mexico. He had also a different company called Infragard that actually owned the trademark for Xintel, and there's some very interesting things going on there. He dissolved the company. Defense notes, timing seems pretty interesting, a little bit more than coincidental given the issues raised in this case and also presented in the media, alleging that these guys entrapped the defendants. Commercial behavior only compounds the overreaching and the emotional manipulation and the government's strategic planning that ultimately came up short. Bears noting that in an analogous context, one involving an agent's prior coercive scheme, Sixth Circuit has said evidence relating to an agent's tactics and motivations is admissible, and the trial courts abuse their discretion in excluding it. What they're telling the court is that the Sixth Circuit, the court that is one head above us, has said historically that you can get evidence about tactics and motivation into court. It's admissible. So what they're saying is that we can talk about this stuff from ex-intel. We can talk about Special Agent Chambers' extracurricular activities. And they're saying this is justifying the motion to dismiss, therefore, court, please grant it. Here is a reminder about what those documents look like. This is out of the official of the Secretary of State of New Mexico. You can see the LLC that was formed here is ex-intel, EXE Intel LLC. It was something that had a mailing address filed on April 4th, 2019. Registered names, Jason Chambers, Special Agent Chambers. So he's got this ex-Intel company that the trademark is owned by Infragard that is also formulated, also out of New Mexico. Very weird things going on with Special Agent Chambers. The defense motion continues. It says, court, the defendants here never agreed to the government's kidnapping plan. A repudiation that even the government implicitly recognizes they didn't want to do it. In response to the defendant's rejection of the plot, government agents then prompted Dan to propose alternative, less violent property crimes. So when they said, no, we're not going to murder and kidnap the governor, they said, okay, we're going to tamper this down a little bit. The government and CHS Dan proposed these ideas in an effort to hang on to something to justify their work. They've been putting so much time and effort into this. They had to come up with something. They couldn't just be setting these guys up for several years or months in this case, but working on just projects like this for a lot longer and not come back with something fruitful. Here's some of the other suggestions they provided. Well, if we're not going to kidnap her, maybe we can fire some rounds into her cottage. How about that? You know, just drive by and just pop some rounds off in there and then actually send the shell casings to her. Notably, government actors made the first effort to find the address for the cottage. So it was somebody's brilliant idea to do this, and then the government agents went, no, we happen to have the address right here. If you'd like to go do it, we have the address for you. The defense is referencing a different case called McClernand, where the court found entrapment as a matter of law when the agents initiated the unlawful activity. When the agents started it, you can't blame it on the other people. Here, they got the address. By doing things like telling the defendant to keep his eyes open for possible drug connections. They started it. The defendants put so little thought into the idea of kidnapping the governor that back on September 13, 2020, when the FBI and their confidential human sources and the defendants, when they reached Elk Rapids in the late evening hours, they failed to find the governor's cottage because they had the wrong address. They couldn't even get there. That incorrect address was provided by Special Agent Chambers at 10:14. As people were making their way from the Cadillac Elk, special agents provided a street number beginning with 7 and ending with 5 when the actual number began with 6 and ended in 5. Well, maybe he didn't want to give him the governor's actual address. So he gave him a fake address. That I can understand. The government's ride-along itinerary was lost to this error. Apparently, the FBI and the confidential human sources had planned to drive their targets to the governor's cottage so these targets could be captured on a poll cam that had been installed in advance for the purpose of acquiring evidence. None of the targets knew the government intended to have them actually go to the cottage as part of the ride-along or enter upon the governor's private property. The government received and controlled every aspect of the alleged plot. On September 5th, 2020, Agent Jason Chambers texted confidential human source Dan, says, quote, mission is to kill the governor, specifically. Special Agent Chambers sends that to Dan. Dan is then the person working with the other co-defendants. Mission is to kill the governor, is what he says. That comes from a motion to admit statements. Then 3 months after the government proposed the kidnapping, and 2 months after the defendant's strident repudiation of the idea, and a month after the defendant's reiteration of their repudiation, the government agents continued to push to shape a kidnapping plan, even trying to elevate it to murder. We have one attempt 3 months after that, still repudiated it. Again and again. But the government agents kept digging and digging and digging. Chambers says, nope, it's now elevated. Defense attorneys say the government's emotional manipulation abounded here. It approached this in a persistent and emotional manner from the outset. Agents and informants used ties related to friendship, being role models, and acting as father figures to develop trust and reliance in the defendants. Confidential human sources use military veterans as informants, having these people pose as patriotic Americans concerned with preserving the principles enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. So they know that these people have an affinity for military veterans, father figures, role models, people who care about the U.S. Constitution. And so they go and they exploit that. How do they do it? Well, we see examples of this everywhere. On June 22nd, 2020, an undercover government employee agent texted Adam Fox. Hey, brother, this is Mark using my girlfriend's account. Elise was talking to your fiance, Amanda, about getting more involved, and Amanda suggested I contact you. From the get-go, the government manufactured ties to loved ones like Fox's fiance to gain acceptance and trust in the group. Hey, just wanted to suggest I contact you. Our girlfriends were talking. On July 11th, confidential human source Dan reported, going good here, just burning rounds, lending out MPX, making friends. Hanging out. We go to September 30th, 2020. Confidential human source Dan tells Adam Fox that Dan can't afford food or medical care. He says he can't even purchase a pizza that costs less than $6. Dan, in reality, really received tens of thousands of dollars for his cooperation with the government, sometimes in envelopes filled with cash. He fostered a bond with the defendants by claiming poverty and deprivation. Dan used his untreated hernia as a device to gain sympathy with Fox and others. He claimed that the VA would not provide him proper treatment after years of combat service in the Army. At the Luther FTX in September, Dan would tell Adam Fox that he was, quote, waiting to die. Feeling the emotional pull of such a confession, Adam Fox told Dan that Dan needed to get surgery treatment as a priority over any of the mission plans that Dan, in his CHS role, was pushing. Adam Fox is a pretty decent guy, says, hey, Dan, you've got this untreated hernia. Before we go and execute these mission plans, maybe it's pertinent and prudent for you to go get treatment and care. And this guy has this sob story. I can't even afford a pizza. Meanwhile, he's getting envelopes of cash from the government. Everybody's taking pretty good care of him. But it continues. The government continued, and they coordinated, and they brought other unrelated participants together for meetings. Numbers of government actors would attempt to radicalize people. The meetings were at Dublin and Peebles in Ohio. They would provide different examples. As touched on above, a confidential human source first raised the specter at one of these Dublin meetings. There was a, quote, national militia meeting, orchestrated by the government, of course. This confidential human source attempted to motivate the targets into anger, rousing speeches featuring Antifa and mask mandates and similar topics. He would say stuff like this. And he'd say, and this right here, this is why the F I'm telling you, it's being allowed by DeWine here, F and F face, wit face. And whatever her name is there, blackface over there. Why are we not returning to the same measure that we were being given? Why are we given a quarter when no quarter is being given? Okay, you see how this goes? Ranting and raving and angry and frothy and just riling people up. The government is doing this. It's not something that is evolving naturally, organically. They're there. They're trying to ensnare people in it. Efforts like these at, quote, national meetings came from multiple confidential human sources and FBI agents who coordinated their work within the meetings to create an atmosphere of crisis and impending social unrest, all in an effort to motivate the targets to work with CHS Dan, to join him in his plot. Dan and his handlers' efforts to coordinate a group to initiate his, quote, attack planning did not bear fruit, however, despite the government's effort and investment of time, money, and manipulation. On September 3rd, 2020, Adam Fox responded to Dan's inquiry as to his proposal about acting on the governor. Fox replied, "No, let's keep that to us, but throw out maybe taking the cap or gunning down Antifa or even say arresting the governor or maybe even charging politicians, and then we can float the idea of cops enforcing constitutional laws. No. Acting on the governor, Fox replied, no." To confidential human source Dan, who was getting envelopes of cash from the government. Multiple repudiations. Dan, back on September 7, 2020, says, listen, Dan says this to a chat. Listen, our main direction at the moment is to prepare for possible bug out plan. Ty wanted to do, we need have that line set up, make sure everyone's prospective families are safe, and then we can have our assault. But on the next day, on September 8th, Fox said, listen, on a phone, said, listen, this is what I want to do for now, right? Like, I want to do everything we talked about, bro. I really do. I want to follow up on the order, but for now, we've got to do ghosts on it, right? We can't talk about it. We can't. It's ixnay on the plan, eek. Well, like, even with our guys, like, I would put her on the back burner in their minds, okay? Ixnay on the plan. We can't talk about it. I want to do it. I really do. But for now, back burner stuff. Later in the same call, Fox continued to repudiate Dan's plans. Says, because it's not until next effing spring or effing summer, okay? We know we can't do that until then. Let's put that on the back burner for now. Let's focus on something more tangible for the coming future and everything. What we should do is go with Ty and his bug out plan. Repudiation, repudiation. It continues. Adam Fox's priority, as we can see, in September 2020 was to be prepared for what he believed would be a social crisis at the time of the election. He wanted a plan, a bug out plan, just like he said with Ty, to retreat to a secure location so that those involved and their families would have a place to go that would be safe and be removed from any impending social unrest that could occur. As an aside, defense lawyers say, while no conspiracy occurred, even if one might be tempted to consider whether a conspiracy existed between anyone and a confidential human source, the law has been long settled on the point that proof of an agreement between the defendant and a government agent informer cannot support a conspiracy charge and a conviction. A mere agreement alone is not enough. Here we see this motion continues. They're saying that this is a case that warrants a dismissal. Why? The government pushed its agenda. They ignored the disapproval of the defendants and their lack of support for the government's suggestions. The government was the entity that sponsored, coordinated, and produced the, quote, trainings like the one in Cambria. They made an announcement on this. They posted it on Facebook on June 22nd. A confidential human source posted there says, proclaimed an FTX cross-train multi-state on July 11th and July 12th at a location in Forge Road in Cambria, Wisconsin. Here's what they said on Facebook. This event would include medical, live fire, range. We've got a house with breaches, entry stacks, close quarters, knife time, hand-to-hand, family communicate. Okay. Plenty to do. You got to pay for whatever ammo you run through. You can come day or night, set up early, blah, blah, blah. Come and join us. Whole thing set up by the Fed boys. The tone of this announcement established a family-oriented and a friendly community atmosphere that would build relationships between participants. Yeah, lunch and dinner, Saturday and breakfast, lunch. Okay, sounds fun. While the defendants could not afford to travel to this event, Dan made it easy for them. Oh, how do you do that? He paid for the entire trip. Dan paid for the entire trip, the same guy that couldn't afford a pizza, the same guy that won't get any medical treatment on his hernia. He gets a big fat stack of government cash and decides to pay for everything. So he drives them out there, drove, paid for gas, paid for the tolls, paid for the rooms, paid for the meals. At the direction of the agents, he set out to get the defendants to this meeting. No matter the hurdles, a meeting arranged by another confidential human source. These confidential human sources provided all of the, quote, military-style training for that weekend in Wisconsin and elsewhere. None of the other participants had the qualifications or the specialized knowledge to do so. These trainings help the government succeed in its aim to make the defendants look up to and admire its informants. Conditioning. On September 12th, as touched on above, Adam Fox exclaimed of Dan's hernia, says, man, we need to get Dan some medical attention. Yeah, his intestines are hanging out, man. He's one of the most level-headed and professional people I've ever met. He's a good teacher, and his guts are hanging out of his body. Can we help this man? Developing bonds. Adam Fox also was bolstered by these government officials. They published an announcement saying that Fox was commanding officer of the Michigan 3%ers. This was a complete government fabrication. It was designed to further their plan. They were creating the whole story. We go back and we see a little bit of case law here. No one questions that the function of law enforcement is the prevention of crime, the apprehension of criminals. That function, though, does not include the manufacturing of a crime. While criminal activity may require stealth and strategy to appear in an investigation, to make it appear as necessary weapons, that they need these things to do their job, a different question presents itself when the criminal design originates from the officials of the government, and they implant in the mind of an innocent person the disposition to commit the alleged offense, and they induce its commission in order that they may prosecute. They cause it to happen, and then they prosecute it. In such circumstances, they say, stealth and strategy become objectionable police methods. Just like a coerced confession, just like an unlawful search. Congress did not intend that its statutes were to be enforced by tempting innocent persons into violations. People break the law on their own. You don't have to coax them and induce them into doing it. But that's what the FBI did here. The motion continues. It says, given the long list of statements the defense has already provided to the court showing a lack of predisposition on the part of the defendants, meaning they didn't want to go and do this, they weren't predisposed to do this, and the separate filings that will address issues like the lack of relevance of their criminal histories, and the government's concentrated, assiduous efforts to initiate a scheme and an offense, one can hardly say that this investigation did not involve any, quote, creative activity on the part of the government. Pretty clear that it did. And the Sixth Circuit has been clear on this as well. No conviction may be had against one who has been induced by the government to commit a crime unless the government proves beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was predisposed to commit that crime. Here, say the defense lawyers, all evidence points to the lack of any subjective predisposition at the center of that inquiry. You have the defendants, several of them, saying specifically, we do not want to do that. Subjectively in their mind, they're saying you can see that their internal intention was not to participate. Defense says the government cannot, quote, disown its informant's actions or their dogged efforts to overcome this lack of predisposition. They did what they did. Taking a look at another case in Sherman, the court commented that although he was not being paid, the informant was an active government informer who had but recently been the instigator of at least 2 other prosecutions. Now, they're comparing that case to this case. In Sherman, they're saying an active government informant was not being paid, but he was a part of 2 other government prosecutions. Here they say the FBI and Special Agent Impola, he testified in state court that Dan, confidential human source Dan, he earned over $50,000 for his work as an informant. So can you see how that might lead to some pretty biased reporting? CHS Dan wants that government money, and he wants to do right by the government. So he's going to deliver the goods. So he continues to get paid $50,000. Defense says courts willing to grant motions similar to this one, which is not a lot of them, have done so even when the defendant was never ready to do the deal today, but still suggested he would do it tomorrow or at some later time. In a prior case, the court granted another motion on entrapment grounds, threw that case out. The personal and the relationship aspects of the case matched many of the aspects of this case. And that's why they say it's justified. And so here they're asking the court to say the defendants in this case, all 5 of them, they exhibited a patently clear absence of predisposition. There's nothing here to indicate that they wanted to participate in this scheme. It was all concocted by the government and the FBI agents. The defendants thus asked the court to find entrapment as a matter of law and dismiss the case. If the defense entrapment is to be meaningful in our jurisprudence, it must be available to the defendants, such as these. Signed off on by some incredible lawyers who are fighting hard, even on Christmas Day, December 25th, filed by Scott Graham, attorney for Franks, Christopher Gibbons, attorney for Fox. We've got Joshua Blanchard, attorney for Croft, Julia Kelly, attorney for Harris, and Michael Hills, attorney for Caserta, Brandon Caserta, all asking the court for a dismissal of the charges, one that is, of course, justified given all of the egregious, preposterous nonsense that we've seen from the FBI and their investigation, and the fact that they are not wanting to call the people that we just talked about, the people who are involved in the underlying inquiry, can't be bothered to come to trial because they have so many problems, and the government has not dismissed this case. So good luck to the defense lawyers who filed that motion. We are going to continue to follow this case along. I hope you join us in that journey, and I will see you on the next one.